There's something about being out in the wilderness that brings me a sense of calm. Just me, my tent, and the quiet of the forest. It's a peace I can't find in the chaos of the city. That's why on a long weekend, I decided to go camping in the Ouachita Mountains, far from any trailheads, with no one around. I had my tent set up about 6 miles from the nearest parking lot. No cell service, no distractions, just solitude. The first day was perfect. I spent it hiking along a nearby creek, taking in the beauty of the towering trees and the crisp mountain air. I built a small fire that night and cooked my dinner over it, reading a book under the dimming light. As the sky darkened, the wind picked up, rustling through the leaves, but it was peaceful and I felt completely safe. But that night, things started to feel off. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. It wasn't the wind or a noise that disturbed me. It was more like a gut feeling, something primal. I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. My tent was sealed tight, the fire was out, and the silence was deafening. The usual night sounds, the hoots of owls, the rustle of small animals were absent. I convinced myself it was just the isolation getting to me, so I pulled the sleeping bag over my head and tried to drift back off. The next day, I forced myself to ignore the unease I'd felt. I went for a hike, filled up my water bottles, and enjoyed the serenity of being out in nature. That night, though, the feeling returned. I sat by the fire, trying to push the anxiety out of my mind. The woods felt quieter than they had before. Even the trees seemed still. I couldn't explain it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The shadows between the trees seemed darker, more solid. Around midnight, I heard it, a crunch. It was faint but clear, a footstep, then another. It was coming from the edge of the tree line, just beyond the firelight. Not an animal. The steps were deliberate, slow, measured. I stood up, my heart racing, and called out, "Hello? Is someone out there?" There was no response. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it into the dark. Nothing. The air felt thick, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether to stay or retreat into my tent. After what felt like forever, the steps stopped. I was frozen in place, staring into the darkness, but there was no sign of anyone. I finally went back to my tent, locking the zipper shut behind me. Sleep didn't come easy after that. The next morning I found something strange outside my tent. A small stack of rocks, carefully arranged. They weren't big rocks, but they weren't random either. Someone had placed them there, stacked neatly, like some sort of marker. I hadn't seen them the night before. I had no idea how they got there, but it made my skin crawl. I didn't think much of it at first, but I kicked the pile over, thinking maybe it was some other hiker's idea of a prank. That night I kept a close watch on the tree line, but the forest stayed silent. No strange noises, no footsteps. Everything seemed fine, until about 1 a.m. again. I woke up to the same sense of unease, that prickling feeling on the back of my neck. It was then I saw it. A figure, standing just beyond the trees. It was barely visible, just a silhouette, but I could make out the shape of a person, standing still watching me. My breath caught in my throat. I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" No answer. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the tent, but the figure was gone. I shone the light into the darkness, but there was no movement. I stood there for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I'd seen, but nothing. The forest was still. I couldn't sleep after that. I packed up my things in a rush, throwing everything into my backpack. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I just wanted to leave. I made it to the trailhead just as the sun was rising, and when I finally felt the safety of the parking lot behind me, I told myself I was overreacting. The figure, the stones, it could have been my mind playing tricks. Maybe someone else was out there, just passing through. But when I got home, I found something that stopped me cold. The stack of stones was back, smaller this time, but just as deliberate. It was sitting in the corner of my backpack. I hadn't packed it, and I hadn't seen it before I left. I burned the whole pack, the stones and everything else. I haven't gone camping alone since, and every now and then I swear I see someone standing at the edge of the trees in my backyard, just watching. I've always loved camping. The idea of being surrounded by nothing but trees, The sound of the wind rustling through the leaves and the silence of nature has always drawn me in. It's a way to disconnect, reset, and escape the noise of everyday life. So, when I decided to take a solo camping trip to a remote spot deep in the forest, I thought it would be just what I needed. I packed my gear the night before, making sure I had everything: tent, sleeping bag, food, water, and my trusty flashlight. The plan was simple. I'd drive out, hike in for a few miles, and set up camp by a small lake I'd read about. It wasn't a popular spot, which was perfect for me. I didn't want to be around anyone, just me, the woods, and the quiet. The drive there was long, the kind of drive where the road gets more and more isolated as you go. By the time I arrived, the sun was starting to dip behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I grabbed my pack, slung it over my shoulder, and started the hike. The path wasn't difficult, but it wasn't well marked either. It felt more like a suggestion than an actual trail. As I walked, I could hear the crunch of leaves underfoot, the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. But as the sun set further, the woods seemed to get eerily quiet. The sounds of birds and insects disappeared, and all I could hear was the sound of my own footsteps. When I finally reached the lake, it was nearly dark. The water was still, reflecting the dusky sky. I set up my tent by the water's edge and made a small fire to keep the chill at bay. The flames crackled, sending sparks into the air, but the forest around me was still. I had the feeling of being watched, but I brushed it off. It was probably just the darkness, playing tricks on my mind. I cooked a quick meal, enjoyed the peace for a little while longer, and then retreated into my tent for the night. The forest outside was silent now, save for the occasional owl hoot and the soft rustling of the wind. As I lay there staring at the ceiling of my tent, I felt a creeping unease that I couldn't shake. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe I wasn't used to being completely alone in the woods. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just the feeling of being in an unfamiliar place. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. Around midnight, I woke to a strange sound. It wasn't the wind or any animal I recognized. It was more like footsteps. Soft but deliberate, moving around my campsite. My heart skipped a beat as I lay there, frozen. The footsteps weren't heavy like a person walking, but they weren't light enough to be an animal either. It was almost as if someone was circling my tent, trying to stay quiet. I held my breath, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped for a moment, then started again. Closer this time. My mind raced, wondering if maybe it was another hiker or camper who had lost their way, though I hadn't seen anyone on the trail. I grabbed my flashlight from beside my sleeping bag and turned it on, shining it toward the tent flap. The beam sliced through the darkness, but there was nothing out there. I waited, my hand trembling around the flashlight. The footsteps started again, just outside my tent. I could hear them clearly now, one step, then another, slowly, carefully, almost as if whoever was out there was trying not to alert me to their presence. I froze, unsure of what to do. My phone was in my pack and I could barely hear the hum of any signal in this part of the woods. My only real defense was the knife I had tucked into my boot. It was ridiculous to think it would protect me if something or someone decided to come after me, but it was all I had. The footsteps stopped again, and I strained to hear anything. There was nothing, no rustling, no movement, just silence. It felt like hours passed, though I knew it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. I forced myself to breathe, trying to calm my racing heart. Then I heard it. A voice. Quiet, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. Help. I could barely make out the word. It was like it was coming from right outside the tent. My blood ran cold. Was it someone who was lost, in trouble? Or was it something else, some kind of twisted game? I stayed perfectly still, not daring to move. The voice came again, this time louder, more desperate. Help. Me. I could feel my breath catch in my chest. It was almost as if the voice was coming from just behind me, right on the other side of the tent. I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything else but that eerie whisper, pleading for help. I could feel my skin crawl as the air grew colder inside the tent. Suddenly, the footsteps resumed. They were closer this time, pacing around my tent like something waiting, just waiting for the right moment. I could feel the presence, thick and heavy, lingering on the other side of the fabric. I pressed my back against the tent wall, clutching the knife in my hand, my heart pounding in my ears. Then, without warning, the footsteps stopped. The voice spoke again, but this time it wasn't a plea. It was a laugh, soft, low, and unnatural. It echoed in my mind long after it faded. Gotcha. I couldn't stay in that tent another second. I grabbed my pack, my flashlight, and ran out into the woods. I didn't even bother to look back, just sprinted down the trail, tripping over rocks and roots in the darkness. My breath was ragged, my legs burned, but I couldn't stop, not with that laugh still echoing in my mind. I ran for what felt like hours, not stopping until I finally reached my car, parked at the trailhead. I didn't even care that the road was empty. I jumped in, slammed the door, and locked it. As I sat there trying to calm my breathing, I realized something. The voice, the footsteps, the laugh, it wasn't a person. No human could have moved that silently. No one could have gotten that close without me hearing them. I don't know what it was or if it was even real, but I never went back to that spot. I've heard rumors about that lake since. People say it's cursed, that something lingers in the woods. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe something else. But whatever it was, I won't be camping alone again. Not in those woods. Not ever again. I'd never been the type of person to get scared easily. I loved being outdoors, the calm of the woods, the quiet, the peace that comes with being alone in nature. That's why I decided to go camping by myself for a weekend, just to get away from everything. It was supposed to be a relaxing trip, something to clear my head. But sometimes, the woods aren't as peaceful as they seem. The campsite was in a remote part of the forest, far away from any nearby towns. I was familiar with the area, having camped there a few times before. Setting up my tent took no time at all, and I spent the afternoon collecting firewood, preparing my camp for the night. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the ground, I made a fire and settled in with a book. It was just after dusk when I first noticed him. I'd heard a faint rustling in the trees nearby, but thought nothing of it. Maybe it was just a deer or a raccoon, I thought. But then I heard the crunch of footsteps on the forest floor, slow, deliberate, like someone was trying to be quiet, but not quite succeeding. I stood up, my heart starting to beat faster. My mind raced through possibilities. A hiker, maybe? Or another camper? Hello? I called out, trying to sound casual, though there was a tightness in my voice I couldn't hide. No response. I waited a moment, straining my ears. Nothing. It was then that I realized how still everything else was. The forest had gone completely quiet, the usual sounds of wildlife gone. That's when I felt it, a chill down my spine, a sinking feeling in my stomach. Someone was watching me. I didn't hear the footsteps anymore, but I knew they were still there, lurking just beyond the reach of the firelight. I grabbed the flashlight from my backpack and pointed it toward the tree line, my hands shaking as I did. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but there was no one in sight. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I sat back down by the fire, trying to calm myself. Maybe I was just being paranoid, I told myself. After all, it was late, and I was probably just tired. But the unease in my chest wouldn't go away. I scanned the trees once more, my flashlight flickering as I moved it around. And then I saw him. Standing just at the edge of the woods, barely visible in the shadows, was a man. He was tall, wearing a hooded jacket, his face hidden in the darkness. I froze. The beam of light caught on him for a split second before he ducked out of view. My heart started pounding in my chest. Was he trying to sneak up on me? Why was he just standing there? I had no idea how long he'd been there, watching me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Maybe he was just lost, or he was a fellow camper looking for a spot to set up for the night. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Are you okay? Can I help you?" Nothing. Not even the rustling of leaves. My pulse quickened. I stood up and grabbed my bag, my mind racing. Should I pack up and leave? I didn't want to risk confrontation, but it felt wrong to just sit there and pretend like nothing was happening. My thoughts were interrupted by a sound, soft but unmistakable, a twig snapping behind me. I spun around, flashlight held out in front of me, scanning the area. but there was nothing there. I couldn't stay in the open. My instincts screamed at me to pack up, get in the car, and drive away. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I left now, I'd just be walking right into whatever this person wanted. Maybe he was already closer than I realized. I wasn't sure what to do, so I stayed still, my back pressed against a tree, waiting for the next sound, the next movement. The air grew colder, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then out of nowhere, the man's voice, low, grating, came from behind me. "You shouldn't be out here alone." I didn't move, didn't breathe, as the words sank in. My mind raced. What did he mean? Was he just trying to scare me? Maybe he was some sort of survivalist, or someone who thought I was a threat. But no one who lived out here would talk like that. No one would sneak around a campsite, watch someone without saying anything, and then make that kind of statement. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He was closer now. I could hear the soft shuffle of his boots on the forest floor. I turned my head slowly, my flashlight darting to the edge of the camp. There was no sign of him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was moving, getting closer, and I had no idea where he was. I made my decision then. I had to get out. I grabbed my pack, my heart racing, and moved quickly toward my car. The forest was dark, the path barely visible, but I wasn't going to look back. Every instinct told me to get as far away as possible. As I stumbled down the path, I heard him again. "Leaving so soon?" The voice was right behind me. I spun around, the beam of my flashlight catching the outline of the man. But this time his face was visible. His expression was blank, almost empty, like he didn't have any real thought behind those eyes. He didn't move, didn't make any sound as he watched me. I backed up, stumbling, my breath coming in short gasps. My mind screamed for me to run, but I couldn't bring myself to turn my back on him. Not with that face. Not with the way he was just standing there, watching. Then, without warning, he stepped into the light. He wasn't just any stranger. He was someone I recognized, a person I had seen briefly around town a few weeks ago. But there was no way he could have known I'd be here. No way. My stomach churned with realization. "Stay away from me," I managed to whisper, my voice shaking. The man didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away, disappearing back into the darkness. I didn't wait around. I ran. I ran faster than I ever had, not stopping until I reached my car. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and sped off, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. But I couldn't shake the image of that face from my mind. The emptiness. The knowing. I haven't been back to that campsite since. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I do know one thing. He's still out there, watching.